Yes. Good afternoon, everyone. A warm welcome to all of you on behalf of Medical Service Center Karnataka and the Department of Child and Adolescent Pediatrics, NIMHANS, Bengaluru. I am Dr. Shivkumar, pediatrician by occupation, and I am the Joint Secretary at Medical Service Center Karnataka. The title for today's discussion is Nothing That Grieves Children Can Be Called Little. So, which will be a discussion on child and adolescent mental health issues in context of COVID-19. So we all are aware of the current situation and the havoc that has been created by this COVID-19 pandemic on the minds of society. So through the restrictions, lockdowns, I know every one of us have experienced that uncertainty and the fear of the present and also the future. So today in this discussion, we will be discussing about the mental health issues, particularly in children and adolescent age group people. So what is health? So who are healthy individuals? According to WHO, health is defined as a state of physical, mental, and social well-being, and merely the absence of disease or infirmity. So thus, in order to a good health, so the improvement of mental health is very essential. So it is the same reason why this webinar has been conducted. So before the beginning of the program, I would like to ask Dr. Vasudendra, is the Secretary of Medical Service Center Karnataka, to speak few words about the Medical Service Center. Over to you, sir.
Dr. Vasudendra, you'll have to unmute yourself. Thank you.
Yeah. Good afternoon, everyone. Good afternoon, Dr. Shekhar Sheshadri, sir. Thank you, Dr. Shivkumar, all the participants here. MSC, Medical Service Center, is a socio-medical voluntary organization. We basically work among disaster management, particularly medical relief during disasters. We have been working since 1977. More than 40 years now. We have worked during Bhopal gas tragedy to super cyclone of Orissa, then Latur earthquake, then Gujarat earthquake, tsunami, Uttarakhand, Jammu Kashmir earthquakes, and even in Karnataka recent Kodagu floods. So this is basically a service work we do. Secondly, another work we do is basically to uphold medical ethics in the current scenario where there is deterioration in medical ethics because of various factors. We do by inculcating younger generations of medical students, nursing students, by observing days of great personalities, pioneers of medical science. So this is an organization not just of doctors, it's an organization of doctors of all systems of medicine, pharmacy, nursing, everyone who is connected to healthcare delivery system. So it's a unique organization which is for the people. The third area of our work is to express solidarity to our health workers. We have done in so many occasions to safeguard the interest of health workers across the country and to uphold the right of people, right towards health. That is one of the main motto of our organizations. Health for all is one of the motto of this organization. So we're very happy to be associated with such a senior and eminent psychiatrist, Dr. Shekhar Sheshadri sir and his team. And we once again welcome each one of you. And I hope this webinar, this discussion will be fruitful to each one of you. And this is a topic which is a burning issue. And Dr. Shekhar Sheshadri sir correctly told, this is one of the disasters which is happening, and we need to give adequate attention to this issue. So with this a brief introduction of our organization, and I'll hand over to Dr. Shivkumar for further deliberations. Thank you once again.
Thank you very much, sir. So now, without wasting much time, so we'll proceed to the main event. So I'm very privileged to introduce Dr. Shekhar P. Sheshadri, sir. So right now he is a professor and head of the Department of Child and Adolescent Pediatrics in Nimans. Sir pursued his MBBS degree from Maulana Azad Medical College in the year 1979 and his diploma in psychosocial medicine and MD in the same degree in the years 1983 and 85 respectively. Since then, Sir has decorated various positions for almost 35 years, right from SR, AP, Associate Professor to HOD. Sir has many awards and distinctions. To name a few, DLN Murthy Rao Medal for maximum marks in DPM degree, Niman Silver Jubilee Medal for Best Outgoing MD Student, Dr. Achar Oration Award at Annual Conference of Indian Psychiatric Society in the year 2012. Sir has delivered the first Foundation Day lecture of National Commission for Protection of Child Rights of the Child at Vignan Bhavan in New Delhi. His areas of technical expertise include child and adolescent mental health and psychopathology, including disabilities, advocacy on child rights and law, training of functionaries of the child care organizations, programs for school and out of school children, life skills education for children and adolescents, and many more. Sir has many publications and articles to his name. So before handing over to Sir, I have one instruction to all the participants. So kindly switch off all your mics and not to unmute the mic button in the between. So those who are having any questions, please post your questions in the chat box. Those will be taken after Sir presentation and will be asking to the Sir. So participants in this program are doctors, medical professionals, non-medical professionals also are there in this discussion. There are teachers, there are parents. So it is open to everyone. So now let me hand over the stage to Dr. Seshadri, sir. Over to you, sir.
Thank you very much, Dr. Shivakumar, and thank you very much, Dr. Vasudendra. It is an honor for us to be associated with MSc in this initiative today. This initiative is also part of a new project that we have launched, which is a national initiative and integrated resource for child protection, mental health, and psychosocial care under the Ministry of Women and Child Development, Government of India. Through this project, we aim to work in the health, education, and welfare sectors, which means state school boards, central school boards, the district mental health program, tertiary care centers in psychiatry, childcare institutional staff, child welfare committees, juvenile justice boards, national and state judicial academies, legal services authorities, the National Police Academy at Hyderabad, the Lal Bahadur Shastri Academy for Administration in Mussoorie. All service providers and stakeholders, including Childline India Foundation, who assist and serve any child, every child in the context of mental health and psychosocial care. It is also my privilege that my teacher, Dr. Srinivas Murthy, is present as an audience in today's webinar, and I would like to acknowledge the impetus in community psychiatry that he gave all of us in NIMHANS, because we believe firmly in public child mental health. I would like to quote something which Dr. Murthy said in 2014 in the context of the Bhopal gas disaster, which Vasudendra referred to. He said, though disasters are a challenge in every country, for the affected populations as well as mental health professionals, they represent special challenges and opportunities in developing countries. The Bhopal disaster was the first disaster in India to be studied systematically for the mental health effects with 3 decades of mental health initiatives. An important lesson learned is that there is a need for continuous dialogue with the survivors to both understand their perceptions and needs, as well as for wide use of self-care measures for mental health. Thank you very much, sir, for the inspiration to really carry forward the work of public mental health. The next thing I want to say is child mental health in any case was a ticking time bomb. And what COVID has done is that it has unmasked certain vulnerabilities of children that we need to pay special attention to. Mental health in any case had low priority as far as the health systems were concerned, and in mental health, child mental health had even lesser priority there. And we are talking about 40% of the population here. Let me start with the title of the talk, which is Nothing That Grieves Children Can Ever Be Called Little, Child and Adolescent Mental Health Issues in the Context of COVID-19 Pandemic. This is part of a quote that is taken from Mark Twain, and here is the larger quote. Nothing that grieves us can be called little. By the eternal laws of proportion, a child's loss of a doll and a king's loss of a crown are events of the same size. And what have children lost in the COVID pandemic? Let us examine this. But before we do that, let's reconnect to childhood and set the tone to understand what child mental health and going forward in the pandemic really means. Ladies and gentlemen, I just crave your indulgence for half a minute. Just for half a minute, if you just close your eyes and think of your own childhood of indelible memories, good things and not so good things. School, exams, grandmothers, play, water bodies, travel, illness, hospitals, injections, fights, relationships, family, and experiences. And if you open your eyes and if I were to ask you, what is it that you remember about your childhood? You will remember that which is a stable memory. And a stable memory is something that happened very often, or it may have happened once, but it is just unforgettable because it was so massively traumatic or so massively happy that you cannot forget it. Which is why people say, if you ask them at the age of 35 or 40, what do you remember about your childhood? You know what I remember about my childhood? I remember that in my house, I had a 100-year-old antique bell, and it was my job to ring it during meal times, and everybody would gather, and there was so much of laughter and joy. And now, at the age of 35, it has the pride of place in my house. You know what I remember about childhood? I remember that dad was in a government job, and every 3 years we used to take leave travel concession, LTC, and the planning of those train journeys, and we traveled all over India. In my family in childhood, we had a tradition that every week we'd go to the nearby orphanage to do some social work. And that's where I got my inspiration to do social work and BSc, BSW and MSW. And now at the age of 40, I head the HRD department in this firm. All I remember about childhood is night after night thinking, why was I born in this family? All I remember about my childhood is night after night putting my ear outside the parents' door to listen whether they were killing each other or not. What I remember about this childhood is this thing called COVID. 5 months there was no school and we were locked up. I couldn't go out. I couldn't play with and mom and dad's problems just escalated till there were days in which I felt like banging my head to say, stop this shouting. And So what kind of memories and experiences have constituted children's lives since March, when the first lockdown was declared, till now, where we are still not out of the pandemic? What have children's lives been like? What have pediatricians seen? And have we gone beyond their cold and their fever and their aches and pains and their injuries to look at what their lives have been and how they are negotiating this whole unusual situation that has brought humanity down to its knees in the last 5 months? This is a world crisis. And if you look at the daily wage workers, the migrant labor who've suffered loss of livelihood, what has happened in their children's lives? Is it now that the risk of child trafficking, the risk of child labor, the risk of child marriage is that much more? Is it now that pediatricians who are present here need to be aware that if you see a child, you need to go beyond looking at the medical problem the child has come up with to look at a couple of other questions to assess whether the child has other concerns which are of a mental health nature? And this is the importance, ladies and gentlemen, of really connecting to our childhood. Now, the COVID pandemic has affected children and childhood in several ways. There have been severe restrictions on mobility due to the lockdown. There is disruption in education because the schools have been closed. There is a consequent withdrawal of social interactions and experiences so critical to child development. There is, of course, exposure to parental stress and anxiety. And if you look at the social consequences of the pandemic, how this social consequences give rise to parental stress, and how parental stress can manifest in parental discord, perhaps the themes of argument, perhaps domestic violence, and children who are exposed to this, how are they processing it? Which means consequent exposure to domestic violence, the increased risk of sexual abuse, the risk of school dropout and trafficking for child labor due to family financial problems. So if you were to look at it in terms then of loss of structure, loss of routine, loss of predictability, loss of social spaces, loss of peer interactions, loss of play, and loss of control, which has been described as intolerance of uncertainty. Now, here's the thing. If you ask anyone, how far into the future have you planned? You may have a person who say, I planned for 2 years, I'll complete my master's and then I will apply for PhD. Or someone will say, I planned for 10 years, I'm finishing my doctoral and I already have the seed money to do a startup. But if you ask this question to a stockbroker, he will say 5 minutes, because if I make a bad investment, my world will come crumbling down. What about kids who are taking their exit exams and have the anxiety about loss of or a gap year in their education? What are they going through? So the combination of losses that have occurred in children's lives, the kind of social isolation that occurs, and the impact of social isolation on children with special needs, children with autism, children with intellectual disability. Special schools are also closed. It is possible that the parents are giving the kind of training and stimulation that is required. But if the parents are struggling with their own stress and anxiety, what is the extent to which this social isolation is actually compromising the needs of special needs children? Is there child abuse, emotional, physical, sexual, and domestic violence? How many families in the COVID have had the theme of death and illness of loved ones? How many have the fear of contracting the disease? What are children's concerns and anxieties? What are the after effects of a child who has been infected? What does financial insecurity do to the mental health of children? If pandemic and the COVID, if the COVID is a contemporary pandemic, adverse childhood experiences and domestic violence, ladies and gentlemen, are never-ending pandemics. So if there were adverse childhood experiences, or what are called as ACEs, which were there in the pre-pandemic era, what is the extent to which they have been exacerbated because of the stress and limitations of COVID? And once schools reopen, what about the children's readjustment in school? How will children engage in learning with these simultaneous stresses in their background? And we are talking about a situation where both the COVID pandemic and the National Education Policy 2020 have come at the same time. And NEP 2020 has some remarkable thoughts to it, not the least of which was mentioned by the Honorable Prime Minister, saying that the focus is not on what to learn, but how to learn. So content children will always learn. So how will schools negotiate this paradigm shift and embrace new pedagogies to, and how is that going to impact on the lives and experiences of children? So look at the framework of how the COVID pandemic has affected children and childhood in several ways. And this is a public health issue. This is an issue not just for child psychiatrists, but for public health professionals, for pediatricians, for teachers, for the Anganwadi and ICDS system, for civil society, for the media, for the state. So children affected thus may have a hard time coping with their emotions. What are the manifestations? They could be sadness, there could be anxiety, there could be irritability and hostility. They may be argumentative. They may refuse to go to school when it opens, among other responses. But what is very critical is that these so-called abnormal behaviors need to be understood as normal reactions to the abnormal situation. These behaviors are not abnormal, they are understandable and normal reactions to an abnormal situation. And this is a point that was emphasized in a Supreme Court order passed by a quorum consisting of Justice Deepak Gupta and Justice Nageshwar Rao on April the 3rd, when they spoke about childcare institutions. Then they said that all staff working in childcare institutions need to understand that these are normal reactions to an abnormal situation, and how we must all strive to reassure children that it is all right in such an unusual time to feel this way, and find ways and means to help them cope and come out. And I will be discussing this as we go forward. Now, here is the most critical issue of how you understand the child's experiences and inner voice. This is a critical framework for all people working with children to keep in mind. Context big. The context. In this context, a child may have an experience that is difficult or traumatic, such as exposure to domestic violence, such as the theme of alcoholism, such as a family member becoming positive and being in the ICU. such as separation experiences, because one parent is infected and has to be hospitalized. The inner voice is a first-person voice in which the child responds to this context and experience by saying or thinking, I am, or I feel, or I wish. The emotions could be one of anxiety, sadness, anger, or happiness, and the behaviors, therefore, range from what we call as internalizing, which is weepiness and withdrawal, or externalizing, such as irritability, stubbornness, anger, and perhaps in older children, substance abuse. Let's apply this to a 7-year-old. 7-year-old Hina is told she cannot go to school, cannot go to the park to play, and maintain distance with everyone. Her mother has also told her that if she goes out and plays and interacts with friends, she and everyone in the family might have to go to the hospital. In the past few weeks, Hina has become clingy, and there have been episodes of bedwetting for a few weeks. Now, obviously, the context is one of COVID. The experience is one of restriction, of denial. What could the child be thinking? As you ponder on this, ladies and gentlemen, what could the child be thinking? I wish my mother would allow me to go. What does it matter if I play for half an hour? I want to be with my friends. Or I should listen to my mother. What if I play and I actually cause a problem to someone? By thinking about going out, is that itself going to cause a problem? Even when I looked out of the window to look at children in the park, would this virus have come and affected me? Now, if the child's inner voice is, why can't she allow me to go out? I want to go out. Why is she always stopping me? The child's emotion will be anger, and the child could either be withdrawn or irritable. But if the child's inner voice is, oh, I looked out of the window and the window was open, and my mother said, even peeping out a little, I may get infected and the family may have to go to the hospital. Have I done some harm to my family? The child may become anxious and sad and therefore may be weepy and withdrawn. What this means is that two children who are in exactly the same context and experience may have completely different behaviors based on how they process it. Conversely, 4 children with the same behaviors may be coming from a place where the experience is completely different. So for Hina, she became clingy and had episodes of bedwetting because she got anxious that the family may get infected. But another Hina, who is 7 years old, has become clingy because the experience was that not just that she was restricted, but also that one of the family members is hospitalized. For a third Hina, she has become clingy and has bedwetting because there is restriction, but the father has also lost his job, and the family is constantly talking about how things are going to improve, and the electricity bill has not been paid. And the child who is intelligent is listening to all this. Take the example of 16-year-old Anwar, who has just finished 10th grade and had plans for high school and junior college. For the past few weeks, he's not interacting with his family. When asked to eat, he refuses. And with a slight probe, he begins to act out by throwing anything that is around him. Yesterday, he broke the fish bowl. He's always on his phone and asserts that he wants to go out and meet his friends as he has nothing to do at home. This is a 7-year-old. This is a 16-year-old. The context is the same, COVID. The experience here is also one of restriction, perhaps some anxiety about exit exams. These plans for high school and junior college have been thwarted. What could his inner voice be? Let's try and think of this from the perspective of two things here. He's not interacting and he's refuses to eat, which obviously means that he's sad. Or he throws stuff, he breaks things, which is the behavior, which means he's angry. For the same context and experience, and these two sets of emotions and behavior, if we were to think of what the inner voice would be, if you look only at lowered interaction and refusing to eat, which is sadness, the inner voice is likely to be, what's going to happen in my 11th and 12th? How long will the lockdown continue? I had plans to go for special courses. Everything has stopped now. On the other hand, if you look at anger and breaking stuff, the inner voice would be, why are they not allowing me to meet my friends? Any case, nothing is happening at home. Schools are closed. Why are you constantly telling me that I should not be on the phone and talk to my friends? What do you expect me to do? How am I supposed to spend my time? So understanding the child's experience and the inner voice is so critical when we look at psychotherapeutic and counseling approaches, even in a pediatrician's chamber, that whether it's a 7-year-old or a 16-year-old, if they are convinced that you're not just responding to this saying, stop crying, or, why are you always so irritable and angry, that without recognizing what the emotion behind that behavior is, and more specifically what the inner thought is, and validating it and acknowledging that it comes from a certain experience. So the behavior is not the problem. It is the processing to the experience that a child has endured in a very unusual context that we need to keep in mind. And this is how therapeutic processes are actually carried out. Going ahead, let me present to you how children can be helped. At this point of time, I would like to take a pause and go back to one of the things that Dr. Shivakumar, who is moderating the session, had mentioned. Dr. Shivakumar himself is a pediatrician, and there are many pediatricians who have logged into today's session. The Indian Academy of Pediatrics has a group called iCancel, which is the Indian Child Abuse, Neglect, and Child Labor group. They also have a group called the Indian Child Protection Medical Professionals Network, which is a network of pediatricians, gynecologists, psychiatrists, mental health professionals, and forensic medicine people who are particularly looking at issues of child protection. And we have been in discussion, even in a pediatrician's chamber, as to how you can put simple probe questions to a child other than your routine medical examination. And then you have your heads questionnaire from which you can select items to really understand where a child comes from. And the reason this is important really lies in a story of a 35-year-old man who came back to school many years later and met his teacher who was on the verge of retirement, and asked her teacher, "Do you remember me?" And she looked at him and wore her glasses and said, "No, no, child, I'm sorry, I don't." He said, but I have never forgotten you. You may not recall, but I come from a family situation which was very difficult and traumatic for me. And the truth is, I have not reconciled with my family. And I'm in America now. I'm a software engineer. But 28 years ago, when I was just, or 25 years ago, when I was just a 10-year-old, you saw something on my face. It was a particularly bad day at home. A lot of quarrels, a lot of fighting, and I remember that you did me the dignity of not asking me in front of other children, but when the class was over, you quietly called me aside and said, "Child, you look a little preoccupied, and is anything the matter?" And I told you what was going on at home, and you said, understand how difficult it must be to keep these experiences within you. I'm so happy you shared it with me. And if there's anything I can possibly do to assist, please don't hesitate to tell me. I'm always available. And I have never, ever forgotten that act of kindness. Children remember. So even today, for the children that you see, whichever sector you're in, whether you're a pediatrician, whether you're a GP, whether you're a child service provider, or whether you're a parent, the awareness and responding to children's queries and questions, as is put here as the first thing, makes them aware that you're interested. Go back to what Mark Twain said: in the eternal laws of proportion, a child's loss of a doll and a king's loss of a crown are events of the same size. So what probe questions can you put? The probe questions are very simple. It is, how have things been otherwise, with you and at home? Is there anything that is bothering you or upsetting you? So you see, how are things at home? How are things in your life is a generic probe. A second probe is there anything that is worrying you, bothering you, anything you're concerned about that you'd like to share with me? A third level of a probe question would be, has anything happened, or has anyone said anything or done anything to you that has been upsetting or uncomfortable? And if a child answers with a yes to any of these questions, your probe is marked in the affirmative, and then you can proceed to more elaborate inquiry. And this does not take 40 or 50 minutes. This kind of work can be done very efficiently in anywhere between 5 to 10 minutes if there is the skill and the motivation to look at children not just as patients, but children as people, as human beings with their own struggle for identity and completeness. So children can be helped by responding to their queries and confusions. And their queries and their confusion come from an understanding of the child's inner voice and thoughts. What are the questions in the child's minds? Second is what we call as a mindset shift, which is the modeling of stress management strategies by adults and caregivers. Children are observing, how are my parents handling, the situation of a reduction in family income? How are they managing the lockdown and the social isolation? How are they managing the fact that the father has lost a job? Developing routines and daily schedules are absolutely critical because it helps bring structure and predictability into children's lives. And this handles the basic intolerance of uncertainty that I spoke about, which is very central to generalized anxiety. And then there are specific activities to reduce anxiety, such as relaxation and physical exercise and yoga and meditation, and a focus on enhancing socio-emotional well-being. So these are broad principles of how you work with children. Let's look at each of this in a little more detail. How do you address their questions, confusions, and concerns? Now, children's anxieties stem from worries and concerns that they are internally processing. So, responding to children's questions and confusions is critical, as this helps to alleviate distress and anxiety, at least to some extent. How does one do this? Let's go back again, let's say to Hina, which we spoke about. So she's told that she cannot go to school, go to the park to play, and maintain distance with everyone. Her mother has also told her that if she goes out and plays and interacts, she and everyone in the family might have to go to the hospital. Uh, and in the past few weeks, she's become clingy, and there have been episodes of bedwetting for a few weeks. Now, if you look at how you will respond from these principles, which is recognizing and acknowledging emotions, using developmentally appropriate techniques, ensuring the child's health and safety, being honest, never giving false reassurances, not criticizing and being culturally sensitive, and avoid getting upset with them. Remember their emotional state. What would you say? You would say, for example, that ಅಮ್ಮ ಹೊರಗೆ ಹೋಗಬಾರ್ದು, ಆಟ ಆಡಬಾರ್ದು ಅಂತ ಹೇಳಿದ್ರು, ಇದರಿಂದ ನಿಮಗೆ ಸ್ವಲ್ಪ ತ್ರಾಸು ಇರ್ಬೋದು, ಅಥವಾ ನಿಮ್ಮ ಆರೋಗ್ಯ ಕೆಟ್ಟೋಗುತ್ತೆ, ಆಸ್ಪತ್ರೆಗೆ ಹೋಗಬೇಕು. ನಿಮ್ಮ ಸ್ಥಿತಿನಲ್ಲಿ ಈ ರೀತಿ ಸ್ವಲ್ಪ ಭಯ, ಗಾಬರಿ, ಒತ್ತಡ ಆಗೋದು ಸಹಜ. ಬಟ್ ನಾವು ಸುರಕ್ಷಿತವಾಗಿ ಇರಬೇಕು, ಅದಕ್ಕೋಸ್ಕರನೇ ಹೇಳಿದ್ದೀನಿ. मैं देख रहा हूं कि मम्मी ने कहा कि बाहर मत जाओ, खेलो मत, बीमार हो जाओगे, हॉस्पिटल जाना पड़ेगा. तुम्हारी जगह किसी को भी ये थोड़ी चिंता, थोड़ी कंफ्यूजन होगी, लेकिन सुरक्षा होने के लिए हम लोग सब सुरक्षित रहें, इसलिए मम्मी ने कहा. I see, Hina, that you must be feeling confused because mummy said not to go out and play with others, or you'll fall sick and would have to go to the hospital. You know, anyone in your place would have felt scared and confused, but it is for our safety. And if you are at home, we are safe. It's only for some time, Hina, till there's a medicine, they call vaccine, for this new virus. It's like playing hide and seek. We are hiding at home. Corona is outside and we are at home. Once it goes, we can go out safely. Then it cannot catch us, right? Is there anything else scaring you? So, this kind of a simple response, which is age appropriate, gets the child to be convinced that you're both recognizing and acknowledging the child's emotions. And you see how, in a simple response of this nature, you have gone through the whole issue of recognizing, acknowledging emotions. You've done it in an age-appropriate way. You've ensured issues of health and safety. You've been honest. You did not give any false reassurance. You did not criticize, and you were sensitive, and you did not get upset with them. Because you must remember, the child is already upset. So the modeling of stress management strategies by adults and caregivers is based on the notion that emotions are contagious and children catch emotions from their caregivers. It's understandable under the given situations that adults and caregivers feel considerable anxieties on various counts. So when adults model appropriate stress management, children manage and regulate their own emotions and anxiety. This is always a bi-directional relationship that one needs to keep in mind. And this is what we mean by a mindset shift. There is a difference between saying this is distressing or impossible or traumatizing, and you shift your mindset from stating it this way to say it is difficult, but I think we'll make it through together. So you tell the child, sometimes difficult experiences help us become stronger because we learn many things that we may not have learned otherwise. कभी-कभी कठिन अनुभव जो होते हैं, उससे हम काफी चीजें सीख सकते हैं. और जो हमें वैसे सीखने का अवसर नहीं मिला. Acknowledging different realities but cultivating a sense of positive possibilities. So it is not to deny that some of these realities are difficult. So you acknowledge them, but you also say that let's look at what we can do to come out of these possibilities. Developing routine and daily schedules. Now, why does this help? It helps because it restores normalcy and balance. It restores predictability. It restores control. It restores decision making, particularly if you involve the child in making this routine. And all this helps in reducing anxiety. It maintains their creativity and keeps them occupied and distracted from conscious worry about the pandemic. So, helping children develop a routine for play, for self care activities, for schoolwork, and other hobbies with some kind of a reward system is very critical in an unusual situation that the COVID has imposed and enforced upon us. So, if children cannot go out into the world, how do you bring the world back into the family? How do you bring the world back into childcare institutions? How do you bring nature back into the home? How do you bring creativity, imagination back into the home? And it's as simple as perhaps putting two chairs together and putting a bed sheet on top of that and putting a blue paper on the light, making orange juice and playing some breezy sea music and imagining that you're on the beach side having a beach party. And this is the kind of creativity that keeps children from being distracted, and also it fires their imagination and creates a sense of joyousness in the family. And all this is not time consuming. Just 5 or 10 or even 15 minutes of this kind of playfulness keeps them from getting into the anxiety of the preoccupations that the pandemic has brought upon them. But for those children who have more anxiety, what are the kind of activities that we can do to reduce anxiety? It's important because if anxiety is not dealt with or is very severe, it becomes difficult for the child to carry out daily activities. It causes dysfunctionality. Lack of control and lack of predictability can be very debilitating for a child. Anxiety and depression are very related emotions. Pediatricians also need to keep in mind that severe anxiety often manifests as aches and pains and blackouts. And this is frightening both for the children and for caregivers. Therefore, building a sense of belongingness and trusting and positive connection and reassuring children that we are all in it together is exceedingly important to reduce this anxiety. If this is not done, it makes the child increasingly vulnerable to negative coping mechanisms, one of which is aggression, and in older children, substance abuse, which are called externalizing. But there are also internalizing coping mechanisms such as withdrawal or self-harm behaviors. So providing an explanatory model for anxiety, that anxiety can be a normal mood whenever we have, examinations, performance, meeting someone new, going on the stage, or anxiety can be in stressful situations such as in loss experiences or new experiences which are prolonged or experiences that are difficult. And anxiety has both physical and psychological components. Uncertainty, fear are psychological components. Heart beating fast, sweatiness, and tremors are physical or physiological symptoms. And this is why relaxation techniques like deep breathing, yoga, pranayama, uh, guided imagery, muscle relaxation, distraction activities such as choosing your favorite activity, drawing, dancing, gardening, music, helping, cooking, physical exercises, and rest, relaxation, and recreation. Rest, relaxation, and recreation. When you make time for yourself, because you may not get this chance again once the pandemic goes, and it's provided us an opportunity to re-examine family ties, to re-examine our creativity, get new hobbies, make plans, improve our handwriting, learn gardening skills, learn music, practice calligraphy, new skills which will really create new memories for you to remember the pandemic, not from a negative lens, but from a reasonably non-negative lens, even if it is not positive. Coming to some final thoughts, how do you enhance socio-emotional well-being? Well, ladies and gentlemen, COVID and the pandemic, in some ways, it is as it is. And in newer forms of psychology, which is called cognitive behavior therapy, we have something known as acceptance-based therapies. But emotional well-being and socio-emotional well-being can also be preserved by providing children with the opportunities for play and for art and for expression. Rudolf Steiner, an Austrian psychoanalyst who founded the school of anthroposophy, there is the anthroposophic practice of medicine, there is the anthroposophic practice of education called the Waldorf system. There are residential communities of adults with intellectual disability called Campbell, which are anthroposophic. But they work a lot with nature, with art, with material, with music, with movement. Even for children with special needs, uh, having a pot at home, putting a couple of mustard or coriander seeds in it, helping the child tend to it, and it germinates in 2 to 3 days. For a child to feel a sense of, nature almost flourishing in front of their eyes in a short period, are opportunities for the kind of anthroposophic activities that are very critical. This is the time for building trust and positive connection, that we are all in it together. So social cohesion is a very important construct. And New Zealand has used it very effectively in the COVID. If you look at two countries which had very different approaches to COVID, Sweden was very laissez-faire. They were quite bindas. Everything went on, and there is some talk of their reaching herd immunity, whereas New Zealand was very strict. But they focus a lot on social cohesion and building social networks and support and pro-social behavior, and particularly looking at marginalized population and indigenous population, people with special needs, the geriatric population. And this social cohesion has gone a long way in actually building trusting and positive connections. This is the time to help children identify their strengths and abilities, facilitating regulation of feelings, encouraging them to see the situation as an opportunity to learn and grow. Here are some critical reflections. What meaning am I giving to this situation? How important is it or will be in the coming years? क्या अर्थ दे रहा हूं? क्या मतलब दे रहा हूं मैं इस अनुभव का, इस परिस्थिति का? What can I do right now that will help the most? What is the one thing I have learned which I may not have learned otherwise? A challenge I overcame, a person I reconnected with, a fun activity I did, some memories that make me happy. This is the time for diary keeping, for all kinds of memories to come in. And this is a diary that you'll keep for 1 year, for 2 years, 5 years back. When you look at it, when you put down all this stuff, it'll give you a different perspective of this epoch in your lives. So with that, I come to the end of my presentation. Thank you very much for this opportunity. We have quite a bit of time now to really look at some of the questions that have come. Once again, ladies and gentlemen, the COVID pandemic is a public health issue. Child mental health is of paramount public mental health issue, and it is my appeal to the MSc family and to all people who have been in this session to really look at children's lives and assist children in the peri-COVID and the post-COVID era with particular reference to their mental health, because it is an ethical prerogative and an ethical imperative on us to do this for the children. Over to you, Shiva.
Thank you very much, sir. Thank you for actually briefly taking us to our childhood and how those days were and how things have changed recently. So the sir has beautifully directed the issues bothering children and adolescents and how we should tackle them and the role of teachers and parents in doing so. So now we'll shift to question and answer session. So few of us have posted their questions in the chat box. Those who want to ask their questions, please post it in the chat box. Now we'll go to the questions. Sir, we have first question from Preeti Modi. So her question is, my two kids spending 99% of their time inside the apartment. We both parents are working and I'm worried. It might impact their mental health, even though we spend quality time with them when we are at home. So please guide us how to deal with this. So this is the question, sir.
Right. There's been a lot of concern about screen time and social isolation. Now that the lockdown was there, even NCRT came up with guidelines about how online education should take place. And even before COVID, online education was already, many big companies were doing a lot of online learning and online stuff. Let's look at this in two perspectives. One for very young children under the age of 6, and look at some of the guidelines that have come internationally. In fact, JAMA Pediatrics had published something on children under the age of 6, and this recommendation that for children, young children under the age of 6, total amount of screen time should be maximally about 2 hours, and that too not continuously. It should be in with breaks, because an average 3-year-old child in any case has an attention span of only about 15 to 20 minutes and cannot sustain attention for more than that. This is on the one hand. Even before COVID, there was something known as internet gaming disorder. This is part of a group of conditions called behavioral addictions. Gaming, pornography, social media, Facebook, texting, sexting, and so on and so forth. And a lot of arguments between adolescents and parents about how much of screen time. And so somewhere we have to make a balance that online has come to stay. We cannot wish it away. So here is the critical issue. There is a difference between processed stimulation and unprocessed stimulation. A child merely sitting in front of the television, a very young child, and watching it, these are just images. And the child is making some sense of it based on his or her own age related. But if you're sitting next to the child and helping the child process it, to say, oh, look, he's eating with a fork and knife. Oh, his glass fell down. Oh, he's drinking water. Acha, there are 3 people there, but there are 4 plates. So you're helping the child process and converting that experience into information. So one of the things you can do at home during this social isolation and not being going out is to create these kind of rituals and routines. And that's why I spoke about childhood memories. So if you intersperse or you use even the devices to actually stay in contact. So if the father goes to work, you call the child and say, let's call Appa, daddy, and ask him what he's going to eat for lunch. Or when he comes home, we'll tell him what to bring for. So what all is happening? Social skills, communication skills. So you're actually subverting the dangers of online and device by converting it into social domains. So there are 5 domains of child development: physical, speech and language, social, emotional, and cognitive. How can you use this to keep all domains intact is, essentially so this is my response to this issue. Over to you, Shiva.
Thank you, sir. So we have another question by Dr. Madhu. His question is that how to talk to your children about coronavirus? This is the question, sir.
Right. I think the question uh, should actually be predicated on a more fundamental issue. The issue is not how to talk to your children about coronavirus. The issue even more is how to talk to your children about anything. And unfortunately, parent-child relationships or adult-child relationships are constructed on a culture of instruction, expectation, and obedience. Adesha, Updesha, Apeksha. Adesh, Updesh, Apeksha, and obedience. Not on a culture of conversations. Vartalap ki parampara. Charche to Sanskriti.
Yes.
So we don't have a culture of conversations with children. So first we have to have a culture of conversations. We have to generally have talk time, conversation time. Number one. If we have that culture and conversation, then it becomes easy to speak about, and I've said this very often, if you look at this whole SMS business, SMS standing for sanitization, the S, the mask, M for mask, and the other S for social distancing, or more appropriately, physical distancing, that, why do we wash our hands in any case? When we touch a lot of dirty surfaces, our hands are dirty. So, before eating, we wash our hands. And if we touch too many dirty surfaces, it's more dirty. That's the reason why we wash our hands before we eat. And that's the reason that. So there are a lot of materials available. In fact, the World Health Organization and UNICEF have come out with simple comic books, which really explain. There's another organization called Protsahan, which has come up with a very nice workbook, which parents and service providers can use to really start a conversation. So this is the way that one explains that. It's really, all of you, many of you who are doctors will remember the germ theory that of uh, of infection, and how we simplify it. So who's asking this question? Are you explaining corona to a 4-year-old? Are you explaining it to an 8-year-old? Or are you explaining it to a 16-year-old? Because this is not visible, that unlike many other things in disaster which are visible, the virus is not visible. The virus is not even a living thing. It's a non-living strand of RNA. So how do you explain? So that's the kind of stuff. Dr. Shiva, over to you.
Thank you, sir. So we have another question from Ms. Sheila Suresh from Shivamogga Child Welfare Committee. She asks that during COVID-19 pandemic, there are a lot of challenges that we are facing. I would like your advice in one particular case, which I have detailed below. A boy who has lost his father and lives with his mother, sister, and grandparents recently started fighting and hitting everyone, especially his sister. So, mother wants boy to admit him to the boys government boys' home, but the child does not want to go away from the home. So, what should we do? I mean, Child Welfare Committee, should we admit him in the boys' home or work with the mother to convince her? So, this is the question, sir.
Yeah, we must recognize here that there are two components to the case. Sheila or the Prakarana, idರಲ್ಲಿ ಎರಡು ಭಾಗಗಳಿದೆ. There is a loss experience here, and how children respond to trauma, and the loss experience has occurred in a peri-COVID framework. And in many people who have had loss and trauma due to death of a family member not being able to go for ceremonies because the person who died was elsewhere, closure has not taken place. Please go back to what I presented about behavior, emotion, inner voice, experience, and context. We are seeing the behavior of irritability and anger directed towards certain family members. This is the behavior. What is the emotion behind it? Is the emotion of anger, or is the emotion of distress? So what we really need to understand is, what is this child, this boy going through, and what are the experiences and thoughts in his mind? And if he gets an assurance that what he's thinking and enduring and experience is being understood, acknowledged, and respected and validated, and methods are given to control it. So this is not the time necessarily to separate him from the family and put him in a childcare institution, particularly if the home is a safe and a loving space. This is really the time for what we call a psychological first aid. And there are basic principles of psychological first aid, which I have enumerated when we looked at, how do you handle anxiety and how do you handle distress in children. So that's the way that I would interpret this case. Over to you, Shiva.
Thank you, sir. So we have another question. Um, School closures have resulted in increased rate of abuse and exploitation of children. And there is also increased child labor cases reporting recently. So how do we tackle with these things, sir?
This concern has been expressed, and we are also wondering whether there is robust and hard data for this, or is this more anecdotal and impressionistic? I have been actually trying to access data, whether child abuse and child labor have actually gone up and where the data is coming from. Having said that, there is the danger of this happening at a time like this. And it essentially calls for vigilance on part of the frontline workers, जिनको हम सीमावर्ती कार्यकर्ता कहते हैं, frontline workers, whether they are childline frontline workers or other service agencies, even the outreach program of Medical Service Center. How observant are you, and how receptive are you that just to give you an example, this evening at 6 o'clock, I'm going to a space here, which is a theater space called Rangashankara. And we have been speaking there about repurposing social spaces. And one of the repurposing that we want to do is to keep this space as a space where people can come in, spend half an hour, uh, perhaps to listen to a bit of music, perhaps see some practice, perhaps just 15 minutes of solitude. And what we are going to do there is just be available over several Sundays, so that people come and they have a space to come and report these experiences. So it's a question of vigilance on the part of primary service providers and frontline workers, um, and also a reporting system by which we keep the agenda of child protection and mental health foremost in our mind. And which is why we have, particularly in the time of COVID, we are expanding our work. And in fact, today's initiative, collaboration between MSC and the National Initiative and Integrated Resource for Child Protection, Mental Health and Psychosocial Care of the Ministry of Women and Child Development, Government of India and NIMHANS, is part of expanding this as a public child mental health agenda. And the 330 odd people who have logged on to Zoom, and I don't know how many more on YouTube. It is for you to spread the message, and through this kind of snowballing and cascade, we hope that this idea of child safety and child protection, percolates down. Over to you, Shiva.
Yes, sir. Thank you. So here's another question. Since many parents are working from home, so how to make children understand that parents to have priorities? So this is the question.
It's an interesting question. I think, Shiva, it is related to the whole issue of culture of conversation and how egalitarian and democratic a family is. Saman adhikari parampara, egalitarianism in a family, that and both for individuality and the collective nature of the family to be recognized, and that every person is an individual, every person has the right to his own aspirations and privacy. And therefore the parents as a dyad and their own privacy, the whole family as a system and their specialness, and each individual here with their own aspirations and dreams, that if this idea percolates, then children are more receptive to the fact that parents may have their own agenda. That so it's a two-way street. That for children not to feel that the the entire obligation of the parents is to look after us, and parents also don't feel that the entire obligation of the children is to be obedient, study well, and then help us in our old age. Children are not business investments. They are people who are born in your family because of the joy you feel of an individual growing. They are not business investments that you make so that you will be taken care of in your old age. So this Samanadhikari culture in a family really addresses the issue of respect that you bring to individuals within a family system. Over to you, Shiva.
Thank you, sir. So here's another question from Suma KV. Sir, can you tell us about the stress of children of healthcare workers regarding parent safety and its impact on them? So how do we go about reassuring our children?
Shiva, reassurance is a process.
Yes, sir.
I'm often reminded, just as I quoted Mark Twain, I'm often reminded of a poem by the famous American poetess Emily Dickinson, who says, "Tell all the truth, but tell it slant. Success in circuit lies too bright for our infirm delight. The truth's superb surprise as lightning to the children eased with explanation kind. The truth must dazzle gradually, else every man be blind." संपूर्ण सच बोलो लेकिन तिरछा बोलो. संपूर्ण सत्य हेली. But so the idea is reassurance is not a one-off thing. It's a process. And you also need to understand the inner voice of the child in that anxiety, that how long will you be gone? Are you taking precautions? How do you know you will not get infected? How do I know that I will not get infected because you got infected? Why do you have to do this work? Uh, are you a hero? Can't someone else do it? What is the child thinking? So for the parent to say that these are responsibilities, these are social obligations, for the child to have a sense of what social obligation means, but to say, of course, I'm going to take precautions. I'm not going to be stupid. So that's why whenever I do frontline work, if I'm in a COVID hospital, I wear a PPE. I'm completely, and I'm doing periodic tests, and I'm on the various government apps. Which is there, and I keep filling it for to look at what my health status is like. So you need to understand what the child's anxieties are and address it openly and reassure them that you're taking all the precautions, that you will not do anything stupid, and you're aware of both your obligations and responsibilities to the family as well as to the job. Over to you, Shiva.
Yes, sir. That's rightly explained, sir. Thank you. So here's another question. So my 10 years old prematurely delivered baby got delivered at 25 weeks. She got checked her IQ levels at Jharkhand Hospital, psychiatric hospital, and found to be 71. So for helping her to lead a normal life, what can be done by me as a parent?
Well, I'll very quickly respond to this. This is, of course, not moot to the COVID issue.
Yes, out of box question.
Yeah, but that's okay. Uh, First of all, I want to say that a child is not a number. And though 70 is taken as the cutoff point in psychometry, above 70 is normal intelligence and below 70 is intellectual disability. But if, someone is on the borderline, what does this mean? And this really means that, and what do we mean by a normal life? By normal life, if we mean independence in self-help skills, knowledge of personal safety, sure, with an IQ of 71, someone with training, that should happen. If you're talking about education and employability and so on, this is a child who needs to go to a normal school which has a special section, or perhaps a special needs school, people like this can certainly lead independent lives. Why? Even high functioning, mild intellectual disability can. So, people with borderline intelligence who are on the, but it needs training, and it needs systematic training. And a lot of this training is available both in our earlier website, which we did as part of our project for Government of Karnataka, which is www.nimhanschildproject.in. And if you look at the interventions, you'll find a lot of stuff which looks at stimulation and all that. So training, stimulation, and practice, very important. Over to you, Shiva.
Thank you, sir. So yes, we have another interesting question. So what would be that one piece of advice that you would like to give to a 17-year-old version of yourself during this pandemic?
I am still 17 years old. in my heart. Shiva, I've often, I noticed that someone really asked a question about NEP 2020 and this whole business of of pushing very young children into schools. And I want to emphasize that NEP is a 2020 is a very complex document and its implementation is going to be very critical in the way in going forward. But what it states a lot is it has a lot of emphasis on emotional and social development and mental health. If you look at NEP, particularly for young children. But for a 17-year-old, if I look at myself, I would essentially go back to what I often ask people is, what is the purpose of education? And people say literacy, numeracy, employability, work ethic, and so on, all of which is not right or wrong. But the true purpose of education is the development of an egalitarian personhood, the development of a socially responsive and responsible citizenry, and the development of an identity that is imbued with aesthetic sensibility. That is education. So, social, awareness and a sense of, I think, social obligation and awareness is something. And adolescents are a resource. We often treat them as problems, but they're a wonderful resource. And it's a question of harnessing that energy and that resource, to really contribute to. And this is the basic spirit of NEP 2020. They are clearly looking at building a huge body of solid resource, which is going to contribute to an emerging India. This is the whole spirit of NEP 2020. Over to you, Shiva.
Thank you, sir. So we have another question from Anshuman Mitra. A normal reaction to abnormal situation. So how do we make even mental health professionals of our country accept this enough to practice in era of commercialization of health?
Yeah, it's an interesting question. Let me put it this way, Shiva.
Yes.
Children with anxiety due to some event that took place, a bullying event, or, a teacher was a little strict or something. On the one hand, there is this idea that children ought to be or can be anxious because of their developmental level, and therefore one must not treat or use medication. And what happens is those with severe, disabling, debilitating anxiety are denied the benefit of good clinical approach because you think children ought to be anxious. On the other hand, a child who is anxious because of just some mild thing that happened comes with a terrible prescription with 6 medicines when all it needed was 2 sessions of counseling. So that's the range within which systems sometimes function. And often in situations like this, the choice is not between counseling and medication. The choice is between counseling or counseling plus medication, depending on a good clinical history, good examination, and a judgment on the severity of the condition and how disabling it is. And this is the idea that we are propagating when we are going to be working with the tertiary care systems and the district mental health program as we vitalize public child mental health as part of this national initiative. Over to you, Shiva.
Yes, sir. Thank you, sir. So here's another question from Anand Raj. So he says, do you have any advice for 3 to 4 year olds who are not yet used to school environment, but they are locked up at home due to COVID-19?
Right. There is a technique. This question also needs to be answered in the light of what's going to happen whenever. I mean, UGC has, for example, said that online classes can start, and there is some talk of the fact the colleges may open maybe in October or November after the first semester is over. That now we don't know when schools will actually open physically, but what's going to happen, assuming, let's say that they open in December. Now, for 7 months, there has been a loss in the actual running of the school system. How are teachers going to respond to it? How are school administrations? How are children going to respond to? Has there been a long holiday, and will there be a reluctance to go, or are they dying to go back? That so I think that a lot depends on understanding this from that 4-year-old child's perspective. Is that 4-year-old child, there are 4-year-old children who COVID notwithstanding are reluctant to go to school, and some of them are very keen to go to school. So it's a question of really talking to the child that, school khulne wale hain, kaisa lag raha hai, So this is called as preparing the child. So there's a preparatory stage before the child actually goes to school. So the idea of going to school is floated, discussed. It is even practiced, the whole practice of even getting ready. So it's a preparatory stage. Then there is also technique in cognitive behavior therapy called graded exposure, that for a 4-year-old, that the idea of even going out a bit and coming back. And God knows this 4-year-old child may have anxiety to say, no, I'm not going to go out. COVID is there, virus is there. I'm not going out. That. So how do you take the child through a graded exposure? That. So in each given child, that's the way that we plan and take things forward. Over to you, Shiva.
Thank you, sir. So here we have another question. So, sir, what is your opinion or view in conducting online classes? Here comes the question of affordability to the parents. So, according to you, is it beneficial or not?
Shiva, the digital divide has been a matter of concern that many people have spoken about. Online learning, like I said, had come to stay even before COVID came. There are so many learning management systems, so many companies that are doing extensive online learning. So it's not new that affordability notwithstanding. In one of the series that we had done as part of our national initiative called August Talks, Dr. Padma Sarangapani from Tata Institute of Social Sciences made a very important point, and she said learning is essentially social. So it's not about the mode. It's not about online, offline, physical, direct. Learning is essentially a social, and children are naturally geared towards learning. And how do you create that state of immediacy for a child to actually learn? So going forward, the challenge would be to provide that social context. And this is why if you look at the various COVID stories that are coming from the world, how this principal of a certain school went to each child's house and greeted them from the outside saying, hi, how are you doing? Everything okay? To maintain that sense of contact. And how do teachers really adapt to this online learning mode that and how used are we to, you know, as I'm talking to you, as I'm talking to Rakesh Gupta who's there, Gupta ji आपके साथ बात कर रहा हूँ मैं, you know, for you to have a sense of, or संगरदी देसाई जी आपके साथ मैं बात कर रहा हूँ, you know, नमस्ते देसाई बाबू कैसे हैं आप, सब चांगला है, you know. So how do we make that sense of immediacy? So there is a pedagogy involved here of animation and the social context of learning, which I think will bridge the whole debate, you know, on the digital divide. And I think that some innovation and creativity would be very important to use our social structures and the panchayati system for actually once more moving out of the lockdown actually takes place. How do we how do we make creative approaches to structure the social context in the immediacy of learning? Over to you, Shiva.
Yes, sir. Thank you. So here we have another question from Madhu. Sir, my 10-year-old son watches 10 TV, mobile nearly 5 to 6 hours a day, and I sit with him to make him study for an hour. Once I leave him, he says, "Mom, I'm getting bored," and he has no interest in doing any other things like drawing or coloring or in any other outdoor games. He shows all his interest in watching TV and mobile. So, what is your suggestion, sir?
In any family, the whole issue of a democratic decision making, the idea is not no mobile phone, no screen time, but it's a democratic decision making where if a parent has a concern about the amount of time being spent, and if it is indeed true that that kind of time is detrimental, you know, so is your concern coming out of actual evidence that there is a detrimental impact, or is it just an idea or belief you have that, but the child is actually learning that? So the reconciliation of these tensions needs to be based first on actual evidence that, you know, there is some detrimental impact on the one hand, to some kind of a tabling to say, you know, I'm just a little concerned, you can think about it, and, you know, we can discuss later about how to do a routine where of course you can do your screen time. I'm not saying you should not, but, you know, can we work on a routine? I have some ideas, perhaps you also have some certain ideas, rather than it being one-sided to say here is the routine, follow it. So these are some ways in which you negotiate. So these are all parenting issues. Just as a matter of interest to all of you, our YouTube link has been put on the chat. Please do subscribe to it. We are actually starting on Wednesday the 16th, a new series called Parenting Pathshala. It's a series of about 10 talks on different aspects of parenting children with special needs, concerns about what will happen when you're not there, parenting adolescents in the context of substance use, um, uh, and so on and so forth. There are a series of 10 talks. It's called Parenting Pathshala. It will be 6 to 7 every day, except on the 18th when it is at 9 o'clock at night. Because of some time difference. Otherwise, it's just a 1 hour program and a total running time of only 55 minutes, where a lot of issues pertaining to parenting will be covered. It is nearing 4:30, Shiva, as I see, and I know that there are a lot many other questions. And what we could do is that it would be very interesting to take these questions and do an analysis of what kind of concerns they represent, and we could perhaps work another session.
Definitely, sir. Definitely.
But we will also take these questions and see how they fit into the Parenting Pathshala program that we run, and I would be happy to table them in the Parenting Pathshala program that starts on Wednesday, the 16th at 6 o'clock. The first session is entitled um, A Little Bit of Hope. Is going to have Dr. Indumati Rao, who's done a lot of community-based work in disability, and Mary Barua, who runs the Action for Autism in Delhi. So it's going to be on parenting children with special needs. So we're going to be covering. So we will study all the questions that have been put on chat, and thank you everybody for this absolutely magnificent participation. There are so many questions that have come. We'd be happy to put them, analyze them for content. And I think if there are 70 or 80 questions, they could be put down into 7, 8 major categories of concern. I'd be happy to take them on during the Parenting Pathshala show. So over to you, Shiva, to wind the program. And thank you very much for this opportunity, my friends. Be safe, be well, and be in good cheer. Nobody knows when we're going to come out of this pandemic. We are all in it together. Let's not agonize that it's an unusual time in our history. It will, 100 years from now, when the history of humanity is written, this COVID thing will definitely be written as something that brought humanity down to its knees. But we are doing well. And I'm given to understand the stock market is doing well. But I don't know so much about migrant labor and daily wage workers and how they are doing. And we need to be conscious of our social obligations.
Thank you,
So
sir.
thank you very much. And
Sir, it was
namaskara
wonderful.
to everyone.
Sir, it was very wonderful. Thank you. Thank you, sir.
Thank you, sir. Dear friends, we have come to the end of the session. So it is my privilege to propose this vote of thanks on behalf of Medical Service Center Karnataka and the Department of Child and Adolescent Psychiatry, NIMHANS, Bengaluru. So we want to express our deep felt gratitude to our esteemed speaker, Dr. Shekhar P. Seshadri sir, who has spared his precious time and shared his valuable experiences with all of us. And also this warm thanks to our Dr. Gangadhar. He is a Vice President of Medical Service Center for initiating and organizing this program along with the Department of Child and Adolescent Psychiatry. A sincere gratitude also goes to Dr. Chaitra, Mr. Arobin and her technical team, and also the organizing committee who helped in smooth conducting of this program. And I thank all the participants for actively participating and posting their questions. And I understand a few of the questions could not be answered by sir, but definitely we'll try to make sure we'll get it answered sometime later. And I thank all of you for your patience, and I thank everyone. Thank you. Have a good day.